Smelter's Row reeked of sulfur and smoke. The air hung heavy with the tongue of ore freshly torn from Dreacher's belly, acrid and bitter, crawling into lungs and clinging to clothes. Ash drifted from the chimneys above, settling like gray snow across the ramshackle stalls and cracked stone pavement. The marketplace was always noisy haggling miners, clattering carts, the hiss of molten slag cooling in buckets, but today the sound was warped, twisted into something cruel. A jeer rang out, followed by laughter that spread like a contagion through the crowd. All eyes turned to the figure stumbling down the central aisle. Larry Kellish moved with the unsteady grace of someone refusing to collapse, though every shove from the guards made her knees buckle. Her emerald skin, once luminous and unblemished, was streaked with grime and bruises. Tangled strands of silver-white hair stuck to her face in clumps. She pressed her arms against her chest in a futile attempt to shield herself, but it only made the spectacle more pitiful. Rotten blue vegetables flew from the hands of merchants and miners, splattering against her body. The sharp sting of impact and the wet slide of filth across her bare skin made her flinch, though she bit down hard on her lip to keep from crying out. "Thief!" Someone shouted. "Spy!" another added. "Deceiver!" A third voice snarled, and the words seemed to multiply until they became a chant. Pounding in time with her hammering heart dot, at the head of it all stood Security Chief Bareth Dren, arms folded across his broad chest, a satisfied smirk twisting his face. His eyes gleamed with the cruel delight of a man who believed he had already won. He had orchestrated this humiliation perfectly. Discredit the xenobiologist who had uncovered his smuggling, break her in public, and erase her voice before it could be heard. "Keep moving." Green skin. One of the guards growled, jabbing her with the butt of his shock staff. Sparks crackled, and Nilari stumbled forward, her bare feet scraping against stone until they burned. Tears blurred her violet eyes, but she refused to beg. She would not give them that dot, and the crowd shifted. A ripple of unease coursed through the mass of onlookers. Someone was cutting through, striding with a purpose that ignored the guards, warnings, and the mutters of those pressed shoulder to shoulder in the choking marketplace. A human rarity in this colony moved against the tide, gray-blue eyes fixed on Nilari with something she hadn't seen in weeks. Not hunger, not mockery. Cold fury. "That's enough." His voice cut through the din, steady and commanding. The guards froze, momentarily unsure. The man shrugged off his coat, a fine leather piece, new and still carrying the warmth of his body. Without hesitation, he crossed the final steps and draped it around her trembling shoulders. The lining kissed her skin like sanctuary, covering her nakedness, restoring at least a shred of her dignity. His hands lingered only long enough to ensure she was covered properly, his movements gentle, deliberate. Bareth Dren's smirk faltered. "This isn't your concern," he snapped. The human turned, his gaze locking with the security chief's in a stare that could have scorched Durasteel. "Eric Norton," he said evenly. "Terran Extraction Technologies. And I am invoking Confederacy Statute 47D. Any colonial justice proceeding may be subject to immediate review upon request. Consider this my request." Murmurs broke through the crowd. Statute 47B was real, and everyone knew it. The laughter died, replaced by uncertainty, even shame. A few spectators slipped away, unwilling to be seen as part of the spectacle any longer. Nilari clutched the coat tighter, her tears still wet on her cheeks, but her breath steadier now. When she looked up, violet eyes meeting Eric's, there was something she hadn't felt in days' hope. Dren's jaw tightened, rage simmering beneath his composure, but for the first time he hesitated. The balance of the moment shifted, and all because a human had chosen to act dot in the ashfall stink of Smelter's Row. One coat had undone an entire performance of cruelty. They slipped away from Smelter's Row as the crowd dispersed. the murmur of confusion trailing behind them. Eric guided Nilari into the warren of side alleys, where the stench of sulfur gave way to the sour damp of leaking pipes. She clutched his coat tighter, her bare feet slapping against the stone until he slowed and glanced back at her. Her shoulders trembled, whether from the cold or the shock he couldn't tell. "This way," he murmured, steering her beneath a sagging archway. The narrow passage opened into a quieter street, lined with stacked dwellings and rusted conduits. No one lingered here except the occasional child darting across with a bucket of water. When Nilari stumbled, Eric steadied her with a hand at her elbow, careful not to linger longer than necessary. They stopped before a modest door framed in peeling paint. "My assistant's quarters," she whispered, her voice ragged but steadying. "She's off-world. We can hide here." Her fingers trembled as she keyed in the code, and the lock clicked open with a soft hiss. Inside, the quarters were cramped but clean 2 rooms, a galley alcove, and a bunk shoved against one wall. Nilari shut the door and leaned against it, exhaling as if she'd been holding her breath since the marketplace. The coat slipped slightly from her shoulder, exposing a glimpse of green skin beneath, but she made no move to adjust it. Instead, her violet eyes found his. "I don't know why you did it," she said, voice shaking now that the adrenaline had faded. "No one else ever has." Eric studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "Because it was wrong. Because someone had to." Her lips parted, then closed again. She wrapped the coat tighter around herself, as though it were armor. "On my world, when someone restores another's dignity, it creates what we call a breath debt. It's sacred. Not owed, not forced, but binding in a way that matters." "I wasn't looking for debts," Eric said softly. "I just didn't want to watch them tear you apart." She blinked quickly, fighting the wetness in her eyes. "That's why it matters. You gave without expecting." He shifted, uncomfortable under the intensity of her gaze. "You said assistant's quarters." "El Rafen?" "Yes." Nilari's voice steadied as she moved to the storage unit, pulling free a set of loose coveralls. "She and I shared research for months. She'd be gone another 2 days. Safe enough for now." Eric turned his back as she changed, studying a faded schematic on the wall that mapped the colony's tunnels. Behind him, fabric rustled, and after a moment, her voice returned clearer. "The coat." She paused, then added, "I'll clean it for you." "Keep it," he said without turning. "Looks better on you anyway." A soft laugh escaped her, tentative but real. "Then I owe you more than one debt, it seems." When he finally looked back, Nilari stood clothed, her silver-white hair brushed over her shoulders, her dignity pieced together, though still fragile. Yet her eyes burned with something stronger, now a will to fight. "They accused me of stealing secrets," she said, chin lifting. "But the truth is worse for them. I found evidence data crystals hidden in my samples. Bareth Dren is smuggling rare minerals, trading them for weapons. He framed me to silence me." Eric's jaw tightened. "Classic play. Discredit the whistleblower. I can't go back to my quarters. They'll be watching. But the crystals are hidden. If we can reach them, then we prove everything," he finished for her. A slow smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Looks like we're partners now, Dr. Kellish." Her breath caught at the title. The reminder of who she had been before humiliation stripped it away. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe she might still be that person. Hope flickered, fragile but alive, as ash drifted silently past the narrow window and the colony around them groaned with industry. Somewhere beyond, Bareth Dren thought he had already won. He was wrong. The Eastern Research Wing of Dreacher rose from the haze like a fortress of glass and steel, its panels streaked with soot from the colony's choking vents. Eric adjusted the cuff of his jacket, where his Confederacy-issued prudential band now gleamed, A hastily activated authorization code from Terran Extraction Technologies. It would luck pass scrutiny. Beside him, Milari walked with her head lowered beneath a drab worker's cap, her emerald skin hidden by a pigmentation mask that dulled her tone to the pale blue of the Vexery miners. Loose gray coveralls disguised her figure, the fabric creased and hanging awkwardly. But effective? Remember, Eric murmured as they approached the checkpoint. Your researcher Talon. Transfer from Proxima Station. You don't speak unless spoken to, and you keep your eyes down. Let me do the talking. Ilari inclined her head. I know the part. Just make sure we get to my locker. Her voice carried a quiet resolve, though her fingers flexed nervously inside the pockets of her borrowed gloves. The guard at the security desk barely looked up. His scales were mottled with years of labor, his eyes half-lidded with boredom. Eric slid his credentials across the scanner. The display flared green, and the guard grunted. Preliminary assessment, eh? Guess Confederacy's getting jumpy. With a dismissive wave, he let them through. The decontamination chamber hissed as sterilizing mist enveloped them, then parted to reveal the gleaming corridors of the lab complex. The contrast to Snolter's Row was jarring polished floors, sterile light, specimen tanks humming softly with contained life. Nyla's breath caught, not from wonder, but from familiarity. She belonged here, among data consoles and specimen jars, not in chains in the marketplace. They had taken only a few steps down the hall when a voice rang out, smooth and deceptively pleasant. Well, this is a surprise. Eric stiffened, masking his instinctive reaction behind a cordial smile as he turned. Approaching them with measured grace was a pale blue Vexery woman in a crisp research tunic. Milari's former assistant, Elra Fenn. Her hands were folded neatly before her, her gaze sharp despite the pleasant curve of her lips. Specialist Consultant Norton. Eric introduced himself smoothly, tapping the badge at his chest. Confederacy oversight. This is my research aide, Talon. We're conducting a compliance review ahead of tomorrow's full inspection. Elra tilted her head, eyes sliding toward Nilari. Your assistant seems familiar. Have we met before? Nilari forced herself to turn, her face calm beneath the disguise. Unlikely, she said evenly. This is my first assignment in this sector. The silence stretched a moment too long before Elra smiled again, though her eyes did not soften. Of course. My mistake. Allow me to guide you. Most of the staff were cleared out during the security alert, but someone must maintain the critical specimens. Eric nodded, though every instinct told him to remain wary. He let Elra lead them deeper into the complex, past empty observation rooms and humming consoles, until she gestured toward a side chamber lined with personal lockers. Each researcher has secure storage here. What would you like to see first? Dr. Kellish's, Eric said, his tone measured. Her research falls within our inspection parameters. For the first time, Elra's mask cracked. Her eyes flickered with alarm before she schooled her features. Dr. Kellish is no longer with the division. She was reassigned. Nevertheless, Eric replied, voice like steel, her locker remains subject to audit. Please log the access. Elra moved stiffly to the terminal, her fingers tapping in commands. Ilari's heart thundered in her chest. The familiar panel hissed open, revealing the locker that had once safeguarded her work. She stepped closer, hands trembling as she scanned the shelves. It was empty. The specimen container she had modified, the one where she had hidden the data crystals, was gone. Behind her, Elra's voice carried a note of satisfaction. Strange, isn't it? How quickly things disappear when they no longer belong to you. Milari froze, her disguise suddenly feeling like a paper mask against a storm. Eric's jaw tightened. He had expected resistance, but the gleam in Elra's eyes told him they were already ensnared. Somewhere, deep in the belly of the lab, a silent alarm pulsed to life. The hum of the lab shifted, barely perceptible at first, then unmistakable. A low thrum that prickled across Eric's skin and made the fine hairs on the back of his neck rise. Security protocols. Somewhere, silent alarms had been tripped, and already the air felt tighter, charged with anticipation. Nilari's breath hitched as she stepped back from the empty locker, realization dawning. Elra stood between them and the door, arms folded, no longer bothering to feign innocence. "You always thought you were smarter," she said softly, though venom curled beneath the words. "But here you are, caught in the same trap you set for Dren." Eric's smile came sharp and cold. "If this is a trap, you should have chosen a better one." He glanced at Nilari. Her eyes widened slightly, catching the subtle tilt of his chin toward the far wall. The emergency containment panel. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Heavy, synchronized. Security was closing in. Eric moved suddenly, striding toward the far wall with the ease of someone meant to be there. "Consultant authority," he announced loudly, flashing his credentials at the door's sensor as if he had every right. "Containment audit in progress." His hand slapped the override. Alarms shrieked. Locks disengaged with a hiss, and the lab exploded into chaos. Specimen tanks along the corridor burst open, not with catastrophic failure, but with sudden release. Fluorescent amphibians sprang in every direction, their translucent skin glowing like lanterns. Iridescent insects erupted in shimmering clouds, wings buzzing in a frantic storm. Gelatinous organisms slopped onto the tiles, leaving slick trails of bioluminescence as they writhed toward freedom. The guards rounded the corner at that precise moment and faltered. "Containment breach." One shouted, flinching as a glittering insect cloud swarmed his helmet. Others raised shock staves, trying to corral leaping creatures that had no intention of being corralled. Hilari pressed herself against the wall, half in horror, half in awe. "You're insane," she whispered, clutching the disguise cap against her head. Eric grabbed her hand, pulling her into motion. "Maybe, but it works." Elra lunged toward them, her face twisted with fury. "You won't make it out alive." She spat, reaching for her comb. But a sudden splash of gelatinous ooze dropped from above, coating her arm and dragging her backward with surprising weight. She shrieked, flailing. Eric didn't look back. They sprinted down the corridor, weaving through flashing lights and scattering creatures. The chaos masked their movement perfectly. Security had no idea who was intruder and who was bystander anymore. Eric's grip on Nilari's hand was firm, guiding her through the swirl of confusion. At the end of the hall, he skidded to a stop before a maintenance hatch. With a practiced motion, he pulled a tool from his belt and pried the panel open. The metallic stink of lubricant and ozone wafted out from the narrow tunnel beyond. "In here," he urged. Nilari hesitated only a heartbeat before crawling inside. The tunnel was tight, forcing them shoulder to shoulder as Eric followed, pulling the hatch shut behind them. The noise of the lab dimmed, replaced by the steady drip of condensation and the muffled groan of pipes. Breathing hard, Nilari pressed against the wall to give him space. Their faces were too close, and in the flickering emergency light, she could see every line of determination etched into his features. Her pulse thundered. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "You risked everything." Eric smirked, though his voice was low, serious. "You said those crystals prove everything. Worth a little chaos." She reached out before she could stop herself, fingertips brushing the back of his hand. "Among my people, when someone risks their life for another, the bond deepens. The breath debt becomes something more." His throat worked as he swallowed. The air between them vibrated with tension, thick with the weight of everything unsaid. "Lele," he began, though he wasn't sure what he meant to say. She leaned closer, violet eyes luminous in the dark. For a moment the colony, the smuggling ring, the danger outside all fell away. There was only the warmth of his body pressed against hers in the narrow passage, the promise of safety in his presence, and the impossible pull between two souls who had no business finding each other here. Their lips met, tentative at first, then deeper, as though the chaos behind them had carved out the singular moment of clarity. Her hand pressed against his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heart. He held her gently, reverently, as though she were made of glass and fire both. When they finally pulled apart, breathless in the dark, she whispered, "Tomorrow is uncertain. But this I will not regret." Eric let out a shaky laugh. "Then we better survive tomorrow." "I'm not done arguing with you yet," she smiled. And for the first time since the humiliation in Smelter's Row, the light of defiance returned to her eyes. The maintenance tunnel stretched before them, damp and dim. Beyond its bends and shadows lay danger and betrayal, but also the chance for justice. Hand in hand, they crawled deeper into the unknown. The tunnels opened into a service corridor that smelled of burnt wiring and mineral dust. Emergency lights pulsed red, painting Eric and Nilari in brief flashes of warning as they stumbled forward. Both were breathing hard, their shoulders brushing in the confined space. At last, the maintenance panel gave way to a quieter residential hall Elra's assigned quarters, where not far. Eric peered around a corner, checking for patrols. The chaos in the labs had spread confusion through the colony's security forces. Guards rushed past intersections with weapons half-drawn, chasing phantoms. Perfect cover. He motioned Nilari onward, his hand still steady at the small of her back. When they reached the right door, Nilari's fingers found the hidden override beneath the frame. With a soft click, the panel slid open, revealing a starkly tidy set of rooms. Compared to the warmth of her absent friend's quarters, Elra's home was austere bare walls, sparse furnishings, a desk in the corner with its surface polished to a sterile gleam. "She always kept her valuables here," Nilari whispered, crouching by the desk. Her hands moved with practiced familiarity, tracing an almost invisible seam in the surface until she pressed the release. A hidden compartment slid open with a hiss. Nestled inside, wrapped in protective foam, were several crystalline shards that pulsed faintly with stored data. Nilari's breath caught. "These are mine," she said, her voice trembling between triumph and fury. She lifted them reverently, her violet eyes glistening. All the evidence of Dren's smuggling. Geological anomalies, shipping logs, falsified exports. Enough to bury him. Eric grinned, tension bleeding out of his shoulders. "And enough to clear your name," but his smile faded quickly. She was keeping them. Why not deliver them to Dren already? Insurance, Nilari realized aloud, her expression hardening. If he betrayed her, she could use this as leverage. She set her jaw. She played both sides. Before Eric could reply, the colony's announcement system blared overhead. A metallic voice carried through the walls, steady but urgent. "Attention personnel. Biohazard containment breach in research. Sector C, all non-essential staff report to evacuation zones. Security checkpoints active at all intersections." Nilari's pulse quickened. "They'll be locking the colony down." Eric pocketed the crystals in a small pouch and clipped it to his belt. "Then we move now. If Dren even suspects you recovered these, he'll bolt for the spaceport." As they slipped back into the hall, they found the atmosphere transformed. Groups of miners and technicians had gathered in small knots, whispering heatedly, their eyes flicking toward the direction of the spaceport. A murmur of unrest rippled through the crowd. The story of Nilari's humiliation in the marketplace had spread, and with it, the truth Dren's corruption, his cruelty, his abuse of power. One miner, soot still streaking his face, caught sight of Nilari walking beside Eric. Recognition flashed in his eyes. He stepped closer, voice low but firm. We saw what he did to you. We should have stopped it then. His hands clenched into fists. But now we'll stop him. Others nodded, anger growing like fire in dry brush. The crowd turned from passive observers into something more dangerous, a mob hungry for justice. Eric glanced at Nilari. Proof's one thing, he murmured, but people make it real. She squared her shoulders, her fear melting into resolve. She had been stripped, mocked, shamed in front of this colony. Now, standing in the midst of its citizens, she felt none of that weakness. She felt seen. Eric tapped his communicator, opening a secure line to the Confederacy vessel arbiter. Captain Hogan, he said, his voice clear and sharp, transmitting evidence now. He slid the crystals into the reader port, uploading everything. The crystals glowed as data streamed skyward. Smuggling, weapons trafficking, obstruction. It's all here. The captain's voice came back, crackling with static but steady. Confirmed receipt. We're adjusting course for immediate arrival. Hold your position. Nilari exhaled slowly, relief washing through her. For the first time, her name and work would speak for themselves. But Eric's face was grim as he pocketed the crystals once more. Dren won't wait for the tribunal, he said. If he knows we've got this, he'll run. And if he runs with a shuttle full of weapons, more people will die. From the far end of the avenue, a deep vibration trembled through the ground, the unmistakable ignition of shuttle engines. Nilari's head snapped up. He's already moving. Eric's jaw hardened. Then so are we. Together, with the crowd behind them swelling in restless anger, they turned toward the spaceport. The game had changed. It was no longer Nilari's survival at stake. It was the colony's chance at justice, and Dren's final grasp for escape. The sky over Dreacher burned orange with the colony's perpetual haze, but the glow from the spaceport browned even that out emergency strobes, floodlights, and the growing flare of a shuttle's engines trembling on the pad. Nilari and Eric emerged from the maintenance corridor into the outer bays, the roar of machinery shaking the steel beneath their feet. The crowd had followed, swelling with miners and mechanics who abandoned their posts, drawn by the spectacle of Security Chief Bareth Dren's desperate flight. Eric's communicator buzzed. Norton, Captain Hogan's voice crackled through. The Arbiter is 10 minutes out. Evidence is solid. Hold him until we arrive. 10 minutes might be 10 too many, Eric muttered, scanning the layout. The private shuttle squatted on pad E2, its sleek frame already humming with pre-launch sequences. Dren's men fanned out, weapons in hand, eyes sharp and predatory. 2 dragged civilians forward, pressing shock staves against their backs hostages, trembling beneath the glare of the floodlights. Nilari's heart clenched. He'll kill them if anyone moves, not if we give him something bigger to worry about. Eric's eyes tracked the loading arms and fuel conduits arching over the pad. He tugged Nilari with him into the shadow of a maintenance bay. Fingers flying across a control panel, he punched in his temporary credentials. The system hesitated, then unlocked. What are you doing? Nilari whispered. Lockdown gambit, Eric replied, teeth bared in a tight grin. If he wants out, let's see how he handles a cage. A thunderous clang echoed across the spaceport as reinforced blast doors groaned shut, sealing the hangar bays. Red lights strobed brighter, alarms wailing through the colony. Dren's shuttle rocked as the lockdown clamps engaged, fuel arms swinging into place across its path. On the pad, Dren stormed down the ramp, blaster in hand, his voice booming over the announcement system. This is an act of terrorism. These people are under my protection. Anyone interfering will be treated as hostile. But the crowd had grown too large to intimidate. Miners hefted slag hammers. Welders gripped cutting torches. The humiliation of watching Nilari, dragged through the market, burned fresh in their memory. They muttered, growled, and began pressing forward, no longer cowed. Eric stepped into the light, credentials held high. Bareth Dren. His voice carried, sharp and undeniable. By the authority of the Confederacy Oversight Committee, you are under arrest for smuggling, corruption, and abuse of power. The colonists roared, their anger exploding into cheers. Dren snarled, shoving one of his hostages toward the edge of the pad. One more step and she dies. His men raised weapons, aiming at the restless crowd. Hilary moved to Eric's side, her voice ringing out across the tumult. He disgraced me in front of all of you. He disgraced this colony with his lies. Are you going to let him silence the truth again? Something shifted, and something Dren could not control. The crowd surged, fury overtaking fear. Several of his guards faltered, eyes darting between their chief and the mob pressing closer. Stand down. Dren barked, but his voice cracked, and the authority he'd wielded so easily now rang hollow. Eric seized the moment, slamming a command into the maintenance panel. The fuel arms pivoted violently, swinging down in front of the shuttle's nose. The sleek craft jolted, one stabilizer clipping the steel. Sparks cascaded as the shuttle spun off balance, crashing back onto the pad with a deafening screech of metal. Pandemonium erupted. The hostages broke free, fleeing toward the crowd. Colonists poured across the pad, surrounding the wreckage. Several of Dren's men dropped their weapons and raised their hands, choosing surrender over the wrath of their neighbors. Bareth Dren stood defiant amid the smoke, blaster still clenched, eyes wild. You think this ends me? He roared. I am this colony. But when he swung his weapon toward Hilary, Eric was already there. He stepped in front of her, unflinching, his coat flaring as he planted himself between her and the barrel. No, he said coldly, his voice carrying like steel through the smoke. You're finished. The crowd surged again, emboldened, and at last Dren's own officers wrestled the weapon from his hand. He went down hard, pinned beneath the weight of the very men he'd commanded. Cheers erupted, rolling across the pad like thunder. Hilary clutched Eric's arm, her violet eyes wide with awe and disbelief. You did it, she whispered. He shook his head, gaze sweeping over the gathered colonists, their fists raised high, their voices joined in triumph. No, he said softly. We did. Above, the rumble of engines grew louder as the Arbiter descended toward the landing bay, its sleek silhouette cutting through the haze. Confederacy justice was minutes away, but justice of another kind, justice born from a single human act of defiance, had already been claimed on the ground. Eric turned to Hilary, her emerald skin glowing faintly in the crimson lights. She was no longer the broken woman he had found in the marketplace. She stood tall now, coat draped around her shoulders, her dignity not just restored, but magnified by courage. And for the first time, he thought, maybe this wasn't just her fight. Maybe this was their beginning. The smoke from the crashed shuttle curled into the night air, tinged with the acrid bite of scorched fuel. Colonists still filled the spaceport, some cheering, others weeping with relief. The sight of Bareth Dren bound and dragged across the pad had broken something loose in them, fear replaced by fury, then by a tentative sense of triumph. For the first time in years, the colony breathed as if a weight had been lifted. Hilary stood at the edge of the pad, Eric's coat still draped around her shoulders. The leather was smeared with soot now, but it felt like armor, like a second skin. She drew it tighter, her violet eyes following the Arbiter as it descended onto the auxiliary landing platform. Its hull gleamed under the floodlights, the Confederacy insignia stark against the darkness. The roar of its engines sent ripples through the crowd, a reminder that true authority had finally arrived. Captain Hogan disembarked, with a contingent of Confederacy officers in crisp uniforms. Their presence was magnetic. The colonists pressed closer, murmuring, some bowing their heads, others demanding to be heard. Hogan moved with practiced calm, issuing orders as his people took Dren and his co-conspirators into custody. The smuggler chief spat curses until one of his own former guards struck him silent. Eric stepped forward to meet the captain, offering a quick salute that carried more weight than his contractor's badge ever had. "Evidence has been transmitted," he reported. "It's conclusive. Dren's finished." Hogan studied him a moment, then let a faint smile crease his weathered face. "Impressive work for a man who wasn't supposed to be here more than 6 hours. The Oversight Committee will want a full report. And they'll want her statement, too." His gaze flicked to Nilari, who had stepped closer, chin lifted, no longer cowering. Nilari inclined her head respectfully. "You'll have it. Every detail. No more silence." Her voice carried, strong enough for the gathered colonists to hear. Murmurs of approval rose, a ripple of solidarity, moving through the crowd dot as order slowly returned. Hogan turned to his officers. "Prep departure. We leave for Central Hub 3 hours." Nilari's breath caught. She turned to Eric, her expression shifting hope, worry, something more vulnerable. "He's offered me a post on the Arbiter," she said softly. "A place on their xenobiology team. It's everything I thought I wanted." Eric forced a smile, but his throat tightened. "That's good. You'd be safe, respected. You'd be back where you belong." She stepped closer, searching his eyes. "And yet, when you invited me to Earth, you did more than offer hospitality. Among my people, an invitation like that is a courtship vow." She touched the lapel of his coat, her fingers trembling slightly. "When you covered me in this, you sealed it without knowing." "Did you mean it, Eric?" The question hit him harder than the roar of engines. He saw her as she had been in Smelter's Row broken, shamed, abandoned. And as she was now defiant, luminous, standing proud with the crowd's respect behind her. He reached up, gently tucking a loose strand of silver-white hair behind her ear. "I meant every word," he said quietly. "You deserve oceans, forests, cities filled with light. You deserve to see Earth, and I'd be honored if you'd see it with me." Her violet eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but her smile was radiant. "Then I'll decline Hogan's offer. I'll request a transfer to Earth's Science Division instead. If the Confederacy approves, I'll join their labs there. If not..." She brushed her knuckles against his jaw with surprising tenderness. "I'll find another way. Because I've already chosen my traveling companion." Emotion rose in his chest, raw and unguarded. He pulled her into his arms, the crowd around them momentarily forgotten. She fit there as if she had always belonged, her head resting against him, her laughter breaking like a fragile melody against the roar of the Arbiter's engines dot above them. The sky cleared for the first time in days, the haze thinning to reveal a scatter of stars. Eric lifted his gaze, one arm still wrapped around Nilari's waist. Those stars weren't distant anymore. They were destinations, journeys waiting to begin. Nilari whispered against his chest, voice steady and sure. "My people say the greatest journeys start with a single act of kindness. You gave me yours when you placed this coat on my shoulders." Eric looked down at her, his own voice rough. "Then I'm glad I brought the right coat." They stood together as the Arbiter's lights swept across the colony, not just survivors of cruelty, but partners at the edge of something larger. A revolution had started with a single gesture, and now, beneath the stars, it promised to become a life shared.